Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who celebrated Thanksgiving, I hope you had a wonderful holiday. My name is Iris Bonet. I'm on the faculty here at the Harvard Kennedy School and co-direct the Women in Public Policy program. I'm standing in for Professor Hannah Riley Bowles today. I'm very happy to see many of you for our last session of the WAP research seminar this fall that focuses on exploring work and family. And I am super excited to welcome Professor Ruppanner, who is going to present on Drained, Can Money and Employment Reduce Your Mental Load today? Leah is a research professor at the University of Melbourne and Australia's top gender scholar in many different years, actually, and top sociologist. She is the director of the University of Melbourne's Gender Equity Initiative and founding director of the Future of Work Lab. Professor Ruppanner is an expert on mental load, as the title of her talk indicates today, and that is also the title of her forthcoming book, which is called Drained: Reduce Your Mental Load to Do Less and Be More. Leah will present for the first 45 to 50 minutes in this seminar, and then we'll open the floor to all of your questions. So please hold your questions until I come back closer to the end of the hour. We'll have Q&A as we normally do. You can raise your virtual hand, and I will call on you and will unmute you. Okay, and with that, Leah, the floor is all yours. Thank you so much for joining us. We're super excited to have you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I know it is the day after Thanksgiving and probably a little bit complicated to be here at the end of the year with everything that's going on, so I'm grateful for your time. I'm just going to talk to you today a little bit about some research I've been doing on the mental load. This talk is entitled Drained: Can Money and Employment Reduce Your Mental Load? And if you're waiting for the answer and you thought the answer is no, it can't, you're right. But let me tell you why as we walk through the research. So, I'm a professor at the University of Melbourne in Australia, but I'm currently this year at Vanderbilt. So I'm in a visiting position at Vanderbilt University. And so here in Nashville, the reason I'm here is in part because I have a book coming out next year on the mental load. How do you understand it? How do you define it? How do you tackle it? How do you tame it? And my goal is to help build out a measure of the mental load that helps us really understand what it is beyond the to-do list, beyond the idea that this is just work that mothers do. And part of that is really building in networks and contacts and connections in here into the US. So those of you who are here at different universities, I'm here to be with you, work with you, hear from you, and learn from you. So please do feel free if anything in this strikes you. I am here for a little bit and love to connect and have a conversation. I'm going to talk to you today about one piece of the mental load. So I promise I'll like go to the next slide. Just give me 1 minute. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about in this book that I have coming out next year called Drained. I give you a definition of the mental load. There's 8 different types. And one of the types is a type called life organization. It's probably the way that you've most heard of the mental load in your life, in the media. And this talk is going to talk about one piece of that. And so as I get to the end, I'm going to introduce you to the other 7. But I want you just to, as you're thinking about this, think of this as one of potentially 7 pieces of mental load that you're carrying. Also, I want to just tell you, because I found out today, but I know maybe this isn't the moment, but let's make it the moment. I just found out that they sold my book to Mexico for Spanish distribution. So they're going to translate into Spanish and distribute around the US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and now into Latin America. And since my friend from Spain, Tracy On, is on this call, who knew when we were in Barcelona that I have a book coming out in Spain? How freaking cool is that? So I hope you can celebrate with me because it was the most exciting day. Okay, now let me get to the talk. So, um, what is the mental load? Now, you've probably heard a lot about the mental load. And if I say to you, what is your mental load? You probably feel this intuitively. It feels a feeling, it feels heavy, it feels emotional, it feels stressful, it feels overwhelming, it feels like being on the edge of burnout. And for some of you, it might feel like happiness and joy, right? The mental load is, as we define Dean Brendan Churchill and Liz Dean, University of Melbourne colleagues, what we decided to define the mental load in 2020 is the mental load is the emotional thinking work required to ensure the smooth functioning of family and life. The mental load is the thinking work you do that has an emotional piece. If it were just thinking work, it'd be easy to outsource, it'd be easy to reallocate, it would be in your to-do list. But the fact that it has this emotionality, and for most, it's a negative emotionality. Most, it's a drain, it's a stress, it's a strain. Not always, but it can be. That is the difference between the mental load and other different types of thinking work or physical work you might do. And this is how we define it in 2020 in one of our articles. What I'm going to talk to you about today is the domestic cognitive labor, which is one piece of this mental load. So if you think about the mental load as emotional thinking work, we all carry a mental load, whether you have kids, you don't have kids, you're caring for someone, you're not. You carry a mental load, but the composition looks different. And so, what we're talking about, again, I'm going to give you the 8 at the end, but thinking about this as one piece of it. And this is the one that we've kind of seen most relevantly is the domestic cognitive load. And this is the thinking work of housework and care. What is that kind of emotional thinking work you do around housework and care? We follow, and I know my wonderful friend Allison Damager came in the last talk, and she has a new book out that is phenomenal. You should read it, you should buy it, you should love it. But what we're doing is we're building on her original definition in 2019 that identifies this mental load as having kind of this process. It's scheduling, organizing, and planning a family life. Now, in the book that I have coming out, I'll give you additional stages to this, but this is kind of the primary academic definition or a scholarly definition of the mental load. It is the scheduling, organizing, and planning of family life. And as she defines, it's 9 broad groupings. It's food, childcare, logistics and schedules, cleaning and laundry, shopping, home maintenance, travel and leisure, finances, and social relationships. So this is coming through her 2019 article. The reason why I'm benchmarking this for you is I'm going to talk to you about the data we collected around these kind of measures, around the organizing, scheduling, planning of family life, around these 9 categories. Now, one of the things we also know from the breadth of research that's looked at the domestic cognitive load or the mental load is that it's gendered, that in general, on average, mothers do more of the domestic cognitive load than fathers, and that starts at birth. Some of the original research on this invisible labor is from that kind of moment of the transition into parenthood. And it's this idea that mothers keep track of things like, whether your babies need to be vaccinated, what they like, what they don't like, their sleep schedules, that this kind of transition into parenthood is a really clear solidifier of this gender division of cognitive labor. Now, there's research showing that this is a really clear solidifier of the gender division of physical labor, but also this gender division of cognitive labor, right? Thinking about the doing of it and then the thinking about doing of it. And in part, this is because mothers step into the role of household manager through, as I'll talk to you later on, through this kind of socialization process. And so they step into this moment of being in charge of all of this at that transition into parenthood. Now, I'll tell you one of the things we asked. We asked a question. So we did interviews of over 120 parents in Australia and the US. And we asked them, like, how did you decide who was going to do the mental load? Like, how did you allocate that? How did you just have that discussion about who's going to do what? And most parents said to us, like, what? What do you mean? We didn't discuss it. It just kind of happened. So whereas perhaps there's greater visibility on who's doing the housework or who's doing the dishes or who's doing picking up the kids from school, the mental load, because as we defined in our article, it's enduring, it's invisible, and it's boundaryless. It happens internally. It can happen anywhere. It's boundaryless. You can take it anywhere at any moment in time. And it's enduring, meaning that it doesn't end because it's tied to these people we love. So when do you stop caring or thinking about doing emotional thinking work for the people you love? Never, right? And so the fact that it's invisible, boundaryless, and enduring means that it makes it really heavy and it's distinct to these other forms of labor. I'll talk to you about that as I get into the measurement. But so far, here's where I want you to be at. It has these different stages. There's 9 different processes, 9 different domains, and it's gendered. So, in this research that I'm doing with Anna Weeks, we are kind of interested in this question of like, what explains it? So, if we know to date that the bulk of the scholarship is saying, here's what it is, and here's how we do it, how do we help explain why mothers in particular step into more of the mental load? What explains the gender distribution of the mental load? Why do women step in? As I'm saying this, if I'm saying mothers, because that's how our data is defined, but you're actually feeling a salience, you may be caring for pets, you may be caring for parents, you may be caring for a spouse or a partner. The mental load you carry too, and some of this will have resonance as well, right? Like I'm defining it within this group because that's where our data sits. But as our interviews and subsequent data I've collected have shown, we all carry these types of mental loads and we all care. It's what makes us human. And so you are carrying a mental load in particular to this caring as well, even if in this moment you're not a parent, which is who we're talking about. So if we go into the gender distribution, so one of the kind of key questions we wanted to ask was like, okay, does the mental load look like housework and childcare? And if it does, because a lot of times we think about this as being like the extension of it, right? You do the dishes, but you have to think about who's going to do the dishes and who has bought the soap, et cetera, et cetera. So does the mental load follow the same kind of theoretical process or the same explanatory mechanisms about how that determine who does what and how? And when we look at the housework and childcare literature, the theories are really clear. And they've been there, as you can see from the dates below. I think you can see my little cursor. They're old, right? These are old theories, and they still explain what we're doing or how we're doing it. They still have explanatory power. So there's three kind of main theories that explain the domestic division of labor. The first is this idea of doing gender. This is a notion that, we get socialized, women get socialized into caregiving roles. And so women, just through socialization, through norms, through childhood, through the messages that we hear from society, through religion, through schools, fill in the blank, through the media, you're socialized into being the dominant caregiver. And that is one of the reasons why women step into more of this unpaid, unseen work. In addition to that, there's this argument that women can use domestic labor as a way to quote unquote do gender at home. Now, for any of you who like to do or feel pressured to do some of the magic making around the holidays, this is the idea of creating a home that is beautiful and well decorated and a meal that is ever well received. Part of this is a way in which we do gender to get social recognition, right? In part because women are told that they're responsible for doing this. And in part, this is a way in which the division of household labor can be used as a resource to do gender at home. Sometimes we have an audience and sometimes we don't. But this is one theory that is consistently shown to help explain why women step into more. Gender socialization and women, and the fact that we validate women for doing this leads them to step into more. The second is time availability. This is pretty simple. It's the idea that like the partner with less time available will do less domestic labor. So let's say you work 50 hours a week. You can't create more time, unfortunately. And time is a fixed resource. If you spend more time in one thing, you spend less time in the other. And so as your time in, say, work increases, your time in housework decreases. And helps explain why someone will do more or less. If you're working part-time, you might do more. If you stay at home, you'll do more. And if you're working full-time, you'll do less of the domestic labor. I can't see you, but can you give me a thumbs up if I'm at the right tempo, pace, etc., and everything's going okay? Am I going too fast? Are you with me? How's everyone feeling? Oh, maybe you can't do that. Okay. Um, I'll assume your silence is enthusiasm. Okay. The third resource, right? The third theoretical explanation. Okay, thank you, Erica. One thumbs up. Okay, good. Okay, so the third theory that helps explain domestic labor is resources. And this is the idea that the person with more resources, the person, usually we measure this through income, the person who earns more or earns more of the relative income will do less labor. Now, we don't want to get into it. We can talk about it later, but there is some contention in the literature about whether this is actually a good theoretical explanation or not, in part because there's evidence showing that as women earn more money, and in particular out earn their partners, they do less housework. No, 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 sorry. Let me say that again. There's research showing that as women out earn their partners, out earn their husbands, they do more. The idea is that actually women who earn more, that's a violation of gender norms. That's actually violating the idea that men are supposed to be breadwinners. And so in response, they take on more. They do more of the housework because they don't want to have that double whammy for their partner. The fact that he isn't working or he isn't earning as much as she is, and then he's doing the housework, she overcompensates to help neutralize that threat to his gender or his masculinity, and therefore he does less. Now, this, if you want to read the literature on housework or chat GPT it, like this is kind of contentious about whether this is right or not, but let's just stay in the moment, which is the basic idea is the person who earns more money, higher earning, or is a breadwinner will do less in part because they can activate those resources to decrease their contribution. Okay, so those are the three theories that help explain housework in general. Our question across these articles is there's multiple. So I'm going to talk you through two articles that have already been published. You're more than welcome to read them. They're there, they exist, they're up. But the question is, do these theories apply to the mental load? Do they help explain it? So here are the two articles. One's in the Journal of Marriage and Family, and the other is in Socius that just came out, but they're available. I'll just leave that for 1 second in case you want to see it. But they're all up. They're freely available. You can go behind the paywall on my academia.edu page so you can access them, but these exist. Okay. Across these papers, here's what we're doing. We're taking a sample of 3,000 US parents with a child 18 or under in the home. So this is really about US-based parents. The data is part of Anna Weeks's PhD from Harvard. So how beautiful that I'm here presenting it back for her to y'all. So if any of you want me to go back to your alma mater and present back your research, your PhD research to them, I'm here. And she collected this data February to March 2023. The advantage of this data is that it actually is it's a large sample and it mirrors the US population in parents in terms of age, race and ethnicity, gender, and education. The reason why this is so valuable, I want to say she's done an incredible job. This is very valuable data, is in part because the bulk of the research to date on the mental load has used qualitative data. That's interview data. Those are usually small n, so fewer people, but also because our networks, tend to get through our own networks, they tend to be mostly white, highly educated, more affluent, and full-time working, right? So it's a very distinct segment of the population. And it's not generalizable to everybody. And so the reason why this data is valuable is because we can start going, hey, here's what they found in the qualitative stuff. Can we take it across and look at this large sample of US parents and see what works and what doesn't, what holds and what doesn't? This is not that quantitative or large sample surveys are better, but this is the beauty of when qualitative and quantitative research can work together. And we can take some of their theories that they've built out and then test them with these big samples and speak back to each other, which I think is really, really neat. Okay. Now, in this data, remember I talked to you before about how Anna Weeks, no, sorry. Remember how I talked to you before about how Allison Damager had those kind of 9 types, that 9 types of cognitive labor? Here's the categories again. So using those as the framework, it's cleaning, scheduling, childcare, maintenance, finances, social relationships, and food. I'm going to actually read you the 21 just because I'm going to talk to you about them throughout this entire talk. But I want you to start thinking about how you think these are going to track both in terms of gender and in terms of resources. So the question asks, in your household, and if you want to get a pen out and take your own survey, get ready. Here we go and see how yours is allocated within your home. So in your household, who typically does the following? In terms of cleaning, it's keeping track of when sheets and towels need to be washed, cleaning out kids' clothes that no longer fit, noticing when the house needs to be tidy. For scheduling, it's keeping track of the family calendar, such as kids' medical appointments, planning a family event like a birthday party, remembering to schedule appointments, such as dentist appointments. For childcare, it's researching options for new items children need, like school supplies or shoes, deciding on a childcare provider, babysitter, daycare, camp, noticing when a child's nails need to be cut. For maintenance, noticing when something like a dishwasher or faucet needs repair, booking a repair professional like a plumber or a mechanic, remembering when items like a boiler or car need servicing. For finances, it's researching options for financial products like bank accounts and insurance, deciding how to allocate money, such as paying off credit cards or increasing savings, keeping track of household expenses. In terms of social relationships, finding social options for children's enrichment, sports classes, clubs, etc., coordinating a play date, checking in with family and friends, and then for food, the final category, keeping track of which groceries need to be purchased, deciding what meals to cook, monitoring food for sell-by dates, or noticing when food needs to be thrown away. So taking these 21 items, the first question we ask, in terms of the measurement, the way that respondents responded to this was something equivalent to mostly me, mostly my partner and I share equally, or someone else. The way we coded this was dichotomously, meaning that if it was mostly me, it's given a value of 1. And if it's mostly my partner and I share equally, or someone else, it's given a value of 0. Now, I know the academics in the audience are like, wait, what about, did you look at this in terms of a continuous variable? Did you look at it categorically? The answer is yes, we did. We did sensitivity tests looking at these both as a dichotomous variable, but also as a categorical variable. And the results were substantially the same. The reason why I'm presenting the dichotomous variables is in part because it helps us to understand the shares. It's a little bit more interpretable, I guess, in a wider public. But if you're wondering about this variation, I'm going to tell you we got substantively the same results. Across these, we had a range of independent controls. Now, keep in mind that what we want to do is we want to isolate the effect. We want to be able to say, yes, we found this relationship, and it wasn't because you had a different employment status, or you were older, or you had a different sexual orientation, or you're more traditional. Across all of the models, we have these independent controls, these independent variables of live-in partner, employment status, high personal income, relative income in the household, your share of the physical housework, the number of kids you have in the home, your age, education, race, ethnicity, and this agreement to these two kind of standard measures of gender role attitudes. So a preschool child is likely to suffer if his or her mom works, and a job is all right, but what women really want is a home and children. So higher level agreement is more traditional attitudes, and lower level is more egalitarian attitudes. So all of these are included in the models. I'm not going to present them, but they're in the paper, but just know that these are being controlled across. Okay, so let's get to our first question. Our first question was like, do these measures, because remember I gave you the 9 with the 21 items. The first question is like, do these measures cluster in ways similar to housework? So one of the key findings in the housework literature is that like, actually, mothers do more of the core housework. They do more of the tasks that are frequent, that are daily, and they can't be delayed. And then men or fathers tend to do more of the sporadic and less consequential tasks that can be delayed. So there is this clear split even within housework of women are doing the core stuff. Think about like, you probably can't not do your dishes for a week. You probably have to cook every day. You probably have to just wash the dishes or do some laundry once a week. But could you delay home maintenance? Sure. You could have a yard that you wait a month or 2 months to do. You could delay maybe paying your bills for a little bit. But these are the things that are actually less consequential and you can delay them. And so our first question is what happens with the mental load, right? What happens with this cognitive labor? Is it cleaving in the same way? Or do you just see that actually it forms a single index and then mothers carry everything and fathers carry everything or nothing? So this is our first question. Do they divide? Okay. This is our table that is in the paper, but the first answer is yes, it absolutely does cleave. And it probably cleaves as you were going through that survey, perhaps in the way in which you anticipated that there is one type of cognitive labor that is daily and one type of cognitive labor that is episodic. For those of you who don't spend your lives running regressions and reading factor analyses, this is basically saying, like, hey, this is one type of cognitive load. It is the cleaning, scheduling, childcare, social relationships, and food. And then here's the second type. It's the maintenance and it's the finances. So there's these two different types of mental load, and one is this kind of core and one is this episodic. And that's consistent with the housework literature. Okay. Sorry, I don't know why I keep selecting these weird things. Okay, so the next question is, if we now know that the cognitive labor, much like the physical labor of the home, cleaves into this core and episodic, is it gendered? Of course, we had this hypothesis that mothers will do more of the core tasks and fathers will do more of the episodic, and that will be the allocation. What do we find? Oh, sorry, I just wanted to brag first. What do we find? Well, first, that when we look at the aggregated up, we find that mothers assume 71% of the total mental load tasks, and fathers only take 45. I just wanted to show you this because we ended up on the CBS morning show, and Anna Weeks found this, which was like, somehow it was us and everybody on the morning show talking about our research. Journal of Marriage and Family, December 2024, us. But that's the first finding, right? That mothers are assuming the bulk of the total mental load. And then when we look at the core and the daily and episodic allocation, here's what we find. Thinking about this is mostly me, right? I'm doing most of it. And this will be probably consistent with what you expect. Mothers are this dark, dark kind of shaded. So most mothers are saying they do almost 75% of mothers are saying most of this is me. I'm doing the daily stuff. I'm holding on to, if you remember, it was the childcare, it was the food, it was the scheduling. I'm doing that. Fathers are pretty much in agreement because you can see here's where our distribution split, which means, yeah, okay, mothers are saying they do the bulk, and fathers are saying they don't do the bulk, or they're saying the mothers do the bulk, right? They're not saying they are. There's some men who are saying this, but really it's this kind of division. But when we look at the episodic, and here's where I think is part of the reason why women are so burned out, we can see that yes, fathers are doing more, reporting doing more of the episodic, right? They're saying, yeah, I do most of it. But mothers are also saying they carry it as well. Here's one of the arguments we make about the mental load. You can actually both be telling the truth, right? It could be that actually mothers and fathers are doing this episodic mental load and duplicating it. They might both be doing this task. Unlike housework and childcare, the mental load can be done simultaneously. We can duplicate it and we cannot even have any idea that the other person is doing it. Because it's invisible, it often we only know when the mental load isn't being done because it doesn't get done. And so this is one way in which it's so distinct to, say, housework or childcare. Now, in the interview, you're very unlikely, although some people do, and if you do, you might have to knock this off. You're very unlikely to be washing the dishes again after someone has done it. You're very unlikely to vacuum again after someone in the house has done it. You're very unlikely to change the diaper again because after someone has done it. Sometimes people do, and we can talk about that, but that's usually we don't duplicate that kind of labor, right? But the mental load, you could both be thinking about the bills. You could both be thinking about the finances. You could both be thinking about the home maintenance, even if in the end only one person does it. So there can be duplication in this task, which is one of the things I talk about in my book coming out next year. Okay. So what I want you to be at right now, here's where I want you to be at. I want you to be thinking, interesting. The mental load is like domestic, the physical work we do at home, in part because it splits into core and episodic. It is like the physical work we do at home because mothers do more and fathers do less. However, it can be duplicated. And here we can see that fathers are doing more of the episodic, but mothers also are doing some of that as well. So they're carrying load on load. This is important because I'm going to talk to you about it as we get to question three. Now the next question, just want to see if I'm okay on time. Okay. The next question we asked across, so that was kind of the first article. The second article, we asked this question. Okay, now that we know that these cleave, now that we know that it looks like housework in interesting ways, what does it mean if you have more resources? Can women with greater resources, those who are working, they're employed, or they're earning more money, do they do less of the domestic cognitive load? Keep in mind, we have these controls. Here's where I'm going to talk to you about them. The employment status, I just want to flag these for you. You already saw this slide, but this is all I want you to see from this. Here's where we're going to really look at this employment status measure, whether you have a high personal income, which is defined as earning 100K or more, and whether you are contributing more in terms of relative income in the household. I'm also going to show you how we have like the housework time and childcare time and how these measures predict them differently. So just know these are coming back for you. Whereas in the previous paper, these were just controls. Now these are going to be the main stars of the show. Get ready. Okay, so here's the first question. First thing we did was we looked at the number of mental load tasks for which they reported mothers or fathers. And again, unlike Allison, we don't have couples, we just have individuals, whether they reported they were primarily responsible for these. These are incident rate ratios. I want you to remember too, we're measuring them as a one or a zero, which means you either are mostly, you're mostly responsible for them. And I want you to think about these as if the value goes above one, then it's more. If it goes under one, it's less, right? Thinking about the ratios of these. Okay, so what I want you to see for mothers, I'm gonna talk about mothers first. when we look at the number of mental load tasks, if they are employed, it doesn't matter. What that means is mothers who are employed do no more or less do the same number of mental load tasks as those who are not employed. If they're high income, they do the same. If they earn more of the relative income, they do the same. So for mothers, working, earning high income, or earning more have no impact on their mental load tasks. When we look at the number caring for children, we see something different. We see that resources can be activated, employment can be activated to reduce their caring hours and their housework hours and high income can be used to reduce the number of hours caring and the number of hours in household work. For fathers, we see something different. If they're employed, they do fewer mental load tasks, they do less of the caring of the children, and they do less of the other household work. If they are high income earners, they do more of the mental load tasks, and they also, if they earn more. I'm going to talk to you more about what this looks like. But what I want you to see clearly, because this result and this pattern is going to come again and again and again, for mothers, having these resources doesn't shift their mental load. Yes, it impacts the physical time they spend caring in caregiving and other household tasks, but it doesn't shift their mental load. For fathers, it does, but the relationships are a little bit more interesting or sophisticated. Not sophisticated, nuanced. Again, this is basically the predicted number of mental load tasks by gender. And so graphing these out, women are in red and men are in blue. What I just want you to see here is this flat line. I think you can see my little hand going across this flat line that whether mothers are not employed or employed, whether they're not high earners or high earners, whether they're not the breadwinner or they are the breadwinner, they are carrying the same amount of mental load tasks. It's a flat line. They carry more than fathers, and it's pretty much flat, which means the resources don't matter for the mental load. For fathers, we see patterns that are a little more consistent with what we'd expect, say for an employment. If they're not employed, they do more. If they are employed, they do less, right? These are the differences. If they're not high income, they do fewer, but here you see they look the same. If they're not the breadwinner, here again towards gender neutralization, a little bit less and a little bit more. But what I really want you to see is this flat line for mothers. Resources don't matter from this data. When we look again, because I gave you that first paper, wasn't that smart? So you can see these results about the core versus episodic tasks. And again, these are the incident rate ratios. So under a one means they do fewer, higher than a one means they do more. When we look at the core, if fathers are employed, they do fewer of the core. They're primarily responsible for fewer of the core mental load tasks and fewer of the episodic. If they're high income earning fathers, they do more though, more of the core. And if they earn more in terms of relative income, they do slightly more of the episodic. So again, fathers can activate their resources, in particular if they're employed, to reduce their contributions, but something kind of interesting is happening around the income, and I walk you through what that is. Okay. If you're wondering what that is, now this one is we disaggregated, this is in our appendix, but we disaggregated it again and looking at care, sorry, y'all, care, cleaning, finances, food, maintenance, and scheduling. Employed fathers do less of the care, less of the cleaning, less of the finances, less of the food, less of the scheduling, and less of the social. So if they are employed fathers, they do less of the mental load tasks across pretty much all, with the exception of maintenance of the core of these kind of core of all of these components with the exception of maintenance. If they're high income, they lean into more of the care, more of the cleaning, more of the scheduling, and more of the social. And if they're earning more, they take on more of the finances, the maintenance, and the scheduling. So there's something happening with these high income men where they are taking on more of that kind of core stuff, albeit less than mothers. So mothers still do more, but fathers are taking on more if they're high income than if they're lower income. They're doing more of the care, more of the cleaning, more of the scheduling, and more of the social in terms of the mental load around these tasks. But there's something distinct happening there. So this is where I want you to be at right now. Let me see if I want to tell you this one. Okay, I will. And then I'll give you a little summary. For mothers, sorry, I'm going to go back because I want to give it to you now. Here's why I want you to be at right now. I want you to be thinking, oh, this is interesting that resources are actually a little bit more sophisticated for fathers. The results are nuanced. That actually there's something going distinct happening with our high income earning fathers. But in terms of employment, man, employment functions like any other resource where it gets them out of it. I want you to now start thinking about for mothers, doesn't matter. They can be employed or not, high income or not, relative household earners or not. They do the same amount of core mental load tasks as those who are unemployed, low income, and not the breadwinner. And actually, if they also do pretty much the same amount of episodic tasks, with the exception of relative household income, in which they start to do more. The reason why is as women earn more income, as they start to become the breadwinner, they take on more of the finance, mental load tasks. So they're starting to think not only about the scheduling, the cleaning, the cooking, the food, but now they're starting to track the money. They're the breadwinner. And so they're in there thinking about holding on to primary or reporting primary responsibility for the how for the mental load around finances. They're not dropping, they're adding. They're not reducing, they're adding. Okay, so what? I've given you like a bunch of regression tables. I've talked about a bunch of data. What do we need to take away from this? First, theorizing the mental load. That we can confirm that there is a gender distribution of core and episodic tasks, that mothers are taking on more of the core, that fathers are reporting taking on more of the episodic, except for again, mothers are also doing a lot of the episodic tasks. So it's for mothers, it's load on load, but they are primarily responsible for that core. In terms of theorizing the domestic mental load, like these are the theories that I gave you at the start. You've already seen this slide. Here it is again. Doing gender, yes, there's a gendered component. There's a socialization component of women into the mental load. Time availability doesn't matter for women. Resources doesn't matter for women. For fathers, yes, availability matters. If they're employed, they're going to do less of the mental load than if they're not employed. In terms of resources, though, if they're higher earning, they're also going to do more. Here's the conclusion. For mothers, they do more of the total mental load tasks. They do more of the core daily mental load tasks. Their resources, employment, and earnings don't matter. It doesn't help them get out of any of that, even though it does help them get out of the physical care of children and of household work. And mothers do more because they are mothers. It's about gender. What we argue in the second paper is that there needs to be a new kind of theoretical understanding of this because it isn't really doing gender. Yes, it's gender socialization. Yes, we get socialized into these roles. Yes, women pick them up because they are women. But this idea that women do the mental load to do gender for an audience or to do gender for people's recognition, sometimes maybe, but the mental load is invisible. So you right now might be listening to me talk, but simultaneously wondering, is my mom okay? Did she have a fall? How about my dog? Has it destroyed my house? Do we remember to order fill in the blank eggs for breakfast for tomorrow? And in this regard, you can't see people doing the mental load. So sometimes we aren't doing it to care for or do a performance for the other. So it's something unique because it's so internal. And so what we argued is that the mental load is socially assigned to mothers through socialization into their role of primary caregiver of the family. But you could take mother out and you could put woman in. And then we say it sticks to them. It's sticky. It sticks to them regardless of whether they're employed or how much they earn. They get it because they are women and they can't shake it even if they earn more or are employed. For fathers, it's different. They do less of the total and core mental load tasks. They do more of the episodic mental load tasks. They're taking the maintenance and the finance, and in this way, their brains are following kind of what their bodies are doing in terms of traditional socialization into these domains. But for fathers, employment does get them out of the mental load. However, high earnings mean they do more of the core. Now, um, there is some, let's see, I think I have another, yeah, I'm going to tell you in a minute. So when we think about those three theories, it's like doing gendered, yes, but it's gendered cognitive stickiness for moms and fully engaged fathering for dads. For Time availability, it's no for moms, but yes for dads. And for resources, it's no for moms and yes for dads. Now, when we think about what's happening for dads, I want you to think about this idea that it's this combination of gender socialization that, yes, it's placing the burden on mothers, that it's cognitive stickiness. But also, there's this expectation of fathers, and we have a new paper that just came out that talks about fathers' mental loads. But we have this kind of shifting social norms where no longer are dads just expected to be there. They're also expected to be engaged and involved in the lives of children. And they're expected to be fully engaged dads. They're supposed to be a part of children's emotional worlds. They're not just supposed to be breadwinners. They're not just supposed to be, financial providers who then come home and are aloof at home. They're supposed to be engaged. It's yes and, not either or, right? It's yes, you need to be a financial provider. And yes, you need to be emotionally available to your spouse, your partner, your kids, your parents, your right. You need to have a bigger and wider emotional world. And so what we're seeing, we think, is that high earning fathers probably can activate these. They're either stepping into these roles of I want to be a fully engaged dad more, but also they might have the resources to actually do it. They might be the fathers who can access flexible work. They might be the fathers who are the bosses of the company. They might be the ones who can work remotely. And so they might be able to pick up more of that core, kind of that primary responsibility for children. Okay. I can't see you at all, but I feel like you're having the best time of your lives. So where to next, right? What's happening next? So I'm giving you this like kind of academic discussion about here's the data, here's how we analyze it, here's how we're theorizing it. But I want to tell you that I have more. So I have a book coming out, Drained, 2020, it's coming out April 2026 next year. Like I think it's coming out the 21st. I put a little QR code if you wanted to see more about it, because it's up. So it's coming out Penguin Random House Press in the US, Canada. For those of you who joined late, I just found out today it's being translated into Spanish. So it'll come out in South America and Spain, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. And what I'm trying to do is help people understand the mental load more broadly, like help you think about these 8 different types of mental load that you're probably carrying right now, that don't just sit around just your kids, or they're bigger. And so what I've talked to you today is this one mental load task called life organization. This is one category. And this is the idea that you're staying on top of planning, you're staying on top of the tasks. Another mental load you might be carrying is emotional support. This is checking in on, thinking that emotional thinking work to checking in on family, friends, and coworkers. You might be doing a mental load to relationship hygiene. So doing that kind of emotional thinking work about, do I have good, strong connections? Have I maintained them? Am I building them? Are there new ones? You'll do this at work and you'll think about this as just networking, right? Like, how are you networking well? But you also network for your family. And often mothers would talk about, I'm networking for my kids, right? I'm building these relationships to community, to new friends, to family groups. But thinking about this as one type of mental load, the emotional thinking work you're doing around that. Some of you might do some magic making, the mental load to magic making. This is carrying on traditions and creating special life moments. I'll tell you that, like, this is the one people either love or loathe. It has the most emotional response. People either love to do magic making or they hate to do magic making. And, but still, there is this pressure. And I think around the holidays, you might all be feeling this expectation of like, how do we carry on tradition? How do we make sure that these moments in time are special? Sometimes it can be positive, sometimes it can be negative. Um, I just want to tell you too that one of my proudest moments was I got featured in The Age, which for those of you who are not Australian is like the big art news article in big newspaper in Australia. And I basically said like, I don't do any magic making. I just eat lasagna in the pool. And so they took a picture of me sitting by the pool with a book. And then on Christmas Eve day, they ran on the front page me saying, I don't do magic making, and Santa next to each other. And it's like, how many life moments do you get to have that? Like, could you imagine a bigger moment in time where you are on the front page of a paper with Santa Claus saying, I hate magic making? And so let me say that to you right now so it can be an inspiration as you move through December and maybe into January. Okay, in addition to that is dream building, helping others fulfill their passions and ambitions, individual upkeep, keeping fit and healthy. This was something that often women and mothers said they starved, they felt guilty about, they didn't do it, they didn't, you're right. This was something that they constantly ruminated on, but didn't feel satisfied in the outcome. Safety, protecting family and loved ones from danger. I just want to give a little side note that actually, I don't know if because this is being recorded. Okay, well, I'll still say it. I collected data from 5,000 people in Australia, the US, and the UK on their mental loads. And one of the things that came through so clearly was right now, at this moment in time, safety for Latinos and African Americans in the US. This is a huge mental load. It popped up only in the US as high and only for these groups. And so I think we forget, or we know, or we intuitively feel the way in which what we're experiencing shifts how we enter the world and how we think about things and our mental loads. And you can see some groups, in particular those with marginalized identities or intersectional identities, they carry a mental load that those of us with privilege do not. To have a light mental load is a privilege, and to be able to offload safety is a privilege. But for many people, it is not possible, and safety is critical, and thinking about it is absorbing an even higher and more significant element of their mental load now than perhaps ever before. And that is a problem that we should all be worried about or aware of or here to work together to correct. The final category is metacare, raising children who will thrive into the future. But thinking about metacare is like, what is the world in which you want to live? What kind of world do you want to be in? And how are your actions aligned with that? Again, I think these two, given the current moment, are aligned at this moment in time. Okay, so there's more coming. If you're interested in this, it's there. You can pre-order, et cetera, et cetera. Also, I have a podcast that you'll love. You will, I promise, where I talk about gendered research. Everything's based on an article. And how do we understand this article? How do I help you unpack it, make sense of it, in terms of all the nonsense we tell each other around gender and myths? If you have, this is actually now a plea. If you have research that you think is relevant, please send it to me. I would love, love, love to feature it. It's just kind of a way to do what academics sometimes don't do well, which is we're sometimes not good at talking about what we're doing for the world, for the public. And so I'm trying to do a little bit more. I'm trying to stretch myself and talk a little bit about research and help people understand the connections of why this is critical. And then if you ever want to find out anything more about me, here is my LinkedIn. I post everything all the time. I will tell you how great I am at every moment in time. And you can follow me there. So please engage in conversation. I'd love to hear more what you're thinking, what you're doing, how you're thinking about this, how this hit, what was interesting, what resonated. I would love to have feedback or ways in which you're thinking about the mental load. Reach out. I'd love to have a conversation. Okay, I'm done. Thank you very much. I'm done. I will stop sharing. Oh, thank you.
Hello. Okay. Sorry, it took us a moment to unmute me, but I'm back. Thank you, Leah. I hope you see the hearts and thumbs up and clapping hands and everything coming your way now. So yes, thank you for this enlightening talk, and for the interesting research that you're doing, and also for reminding us at the end that mental load is not fixed, but very well depends on kind of life circumstances. And so I'm actually going to start us off with a question, and then I am going to refer back to the chat. But I am building on the chat that, not surprisingly, many people were interested in the different findings for fathers and mothers that you also highlighted, in that, mothers don't move independent of life circumstances in some ways. And then fathers seem to be adjusting depending on income and relative income in particular. So through my mind went something that I didn't start with, but I'm now just asking the question. So I started with thinking, you know, poor people have higher mental load. Um, and there's some research suggesting that that is actually true. But then I was wondering, well, maybe there is some particular mental load that increases with wealth. So finances, right? So people have investments and all kinds of things and inheritance and who knows what, houses, cars, maintenance. All of a sudden, you don't have just one car, you have three cars. And so I was wondering whether we can somehow control for the amount of mental load, right? Because now it looks like maybe these couples do, I don't want to say
Mhm.
too much, but you talked about the doubling up also, but is it just that men do more because there's more to be done?
Oh, that's interesting. You're saying like almost the standards and the status goes up. And so there's more to manage, there's more to manage. And so therefore everyone's increases. And so men have to step into more. Do I have that right?
Right. And also maybe it is joyful. Maybe it is
Yes.
nice to make a donation to the museum rather than having to worry about survival tomorrow. And so, man, so I'm thinking of this both in terms of, as some economists, so both in terms of economics, but also in terms of gender, and that there's more status involved now. And think about finance and maintenance because it's no longer, surviving, it's more thriving. It's more the thriving category.
That's interesting. It's interesting too because you can think about some of this is tied to kids, right? And what we want, what we expect of our kids, like the mental load around teens, say mental load around teens, or how do we make sure that people are achieving their dreams? And there's an incredible pressure, right? I think what you're saying is as we it's like two, okay, so I'll do two things. One is that yes, the mental load sometimes can be beneficial. And this comes through in my book quite clearly, right? The mental loads are not always wasted, and sometimes they lead to better outcomes, better opportunities, things that went well. And parents talk about like what a gift it was to have that go from A to B to C. So you're right on that. Mental loads can sometimes be positive. The emotion in our article we wrote around the mental load is emotional thinking work. The emotions can be positive and they can be negative, right? They can be draining and they can be exhilarating. And part of the purpose of my book is to help people really think through that and audit through their mental load spending, right? And start to think about how do we use our mental loads to create more joy. So that's right. The second thing is, my friend Scott Scheiman has this theory about like stress of higher status, where it's like actually stress can be really high at the top end. The people who are high earners can be really stressed, and people at the low end can be very stressed. But the mechanisms are very different, right? The reasons, the 24 hours on, the accountability to other people. And you're bringing in another interesting element, right? Which is like actually, if you have a beautiful house and you're investing in the maintenance, that can be dream building. I would use this as one of my categories, right? Dream building, where you're thinking about how do I add the renovation or something, or it's kind of fun to do this because all of a sudden you have more resources, you can play with more resources, and so that can be kind of joyful mental loads. I think both are true, right? Like I think both are true. And when I collected this, because I'm trying to get a measure of mental load to work too, like what's the mental load of work, and I have a little website that's coming up. So thinking about like that how we're thinking about our careers is a mental load as well. So I want to say like yes, yes, and yes, 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 and yes, and thank you for the contribution. And then that's an interesting question about like, is it actually that the volume goes up because the life gets is different? The resources are more, and so the mental load is more because what you can do is more. I'd like to think about that because I think that's a really interesting point that I think is really valuable.
Thank you.
So
So
thank
I'm
you.
now going to call I'm going to go to the chat, and I have Naisha and Fernando both actually working on the same problem that we just discussed on the fathers, and offering maybe two different theories. One is maybe upbringing has something to do. So, wealthy fathers or fathers with high relative income might come from a wealthier household, where maybe their moms were working, which is probably not data that you have, but that's the first question. And then related, I'm going to combine it with Fernando, who says in line with this question. He was wondering about what you controlled for. And I know you showed this to us, but maybe we don't remember completely. Probably education, but egalitarian
Yeah.
beliefs. Um, please.
Um, so to Nisha Bradley's question, we have the article we have in Journal of Family Studies is exactly on dad's mental load. Okay, sorry. So the first answer is yes, some. Yes, in across the interviews. So that we're using the qualitative data on dads in the two countries, Australia and the US. And the short answer is some dads did talk about like being raised by, no, did they talk about being raised by mothers who worked? They really didn't talk that much about their mothers. They talked about their fathers. It was actually the opposite. So in the paper we just published, what we found was like there's kind of two main ways in which fathers approach it is they do this thing where they compare themselves to their fathers. So they're looking to their fathers and their conclusion is like, I'm doing more than my dad. I'm doing more than my dad did in terms of mental load because I'm thinking about my children's emotional well-being. I'm trying to be present. It's like these kind of fully engaged fatherhood norms. Like I'm trying to be present, I'm trying to be emotionally connected, and I'm trying to be different to my dad. Some of them talked about their dads as anti-models, and they would say like, I want to be nothing like my dad. Like my dad just came home, he did nothing, he was a breadwinner, he never helped with anything, he didn't know how to wash a dish. I reject that. I don't want to be that person. Others would say like, so within that category would also be like, I don't want to be anything like my dad because anytime anything happened in my emotional world or my siblings' emotional world, my dad was like, suck it up, drink concrete, right? Like get tough. And so there were these anti-models. They rejected these fathers. But others talked about being better than their dads, like good but not good enough. Like my dad provided this role model, but I want to be even better. And so they were talking about the ways in which they could just kind of elevate from what their dads did. And so they were really concentrating on their dads and their grandparents, right? That they were different fathers to their fathers. The problem was they were still, most of them weren't sharing in the mental load in that cognitive labor. So when they would switch to the moms of because we had heterosexual partnered parents, we restricted our interview data to them, they would be like, oh, but she does more because she's better at it. And this is consistent with what Allison finds in her book, right? This kind of like, oh, no, no, no. But see, okay, no, I'm doing more. I'm doing more right now because I'm doing more than my dad and it's good. And I'm rejecting his model. I'm trying to be a different dad. I'm trying to find a different role model. But I'm doing less than her because she's actually better at the work. And so they would have these two different mental load logics that they would be kind of filtering through how they were entering into the parenthood. We call them like mental load logics. And we talk about how they have to filter their thoughts to try to be different. And so it really was this compare, but that's going to create conflict, right? Like the problem is that has the potential to create conflict within partnerships because you're feeling like you're doing better than your dad, but then you're not quite sharing with the mom. And so, we're not psychologists, but we can anticipate how this could create a real schism. And then I'll just say one last thing is Brendan Churchill, Sabina Cornrich, and I, we have a paper looking at using the American Time Use Survey. And we're finding that dads are stepping into more of the time, housework time, childcare time across generations, that boomers did the least, and then Gen X is doing more, and then millennials have done more. So dads are doing more in terms of the time. The problem is that mothers are still doing the same amount as their mothers did. Like we don't find the generational differences between for mothers that they're carrying a heavier time burden, but dads are doing more. They are doing more in terms of the physical tasks, but there still isn't enough language to come across on the mental load. There isn't that synergy yet, and I hope the book will do that. Is be like, you're only doing pieces of it. You're only doing components of it. So in conclusion, it was really they were talking about who was their role model to be the new dad was where the dominant stream came across our interviews.
And Leah, I want to do justice to Fernando as well, who I kind of just wrapped into the question, but he had a bit of a separate question, and that is just a reminder, what did you control
Oh,
for? Educational level and egalitarian beliefs is his question?
yes, we do. The short answer is yes,
You,
we do. We do plus.
okay,
Race
right.
and ethnicity, education, age, gender role attitudes, for the ones in which employment status. Um,
Yeah.
I could keep
So then
going.
I'm going to jump to Laura, and she has a bit of a version of my question, but I'm still going to ask it because I think hers is slightly different from the question that I asked. Oh, and Laura's right here.
Hi,
Laura,
Laura.
why don't you ask your own question then? Good to see you. I
Good to
think you
see
will be
you
unmuted in just
too.
a
I got
second.
it. Thank you, Iris. Thank you, Leah. This was really interesting. So yeah, if time permits, I wanted to hear more about this idea that the mental load can be done multiple times by multiple parties. And I'm coming from the position of being an economist trained also. So it's sort of like this really interesting idea to me that, if you look at these like Gary Becker old school models of like efficiency in the household, this would be wildly inefficient. And so I'm curious to hear more about why this might be done twice. And if it's enjoyable, maybe that's actually not inefficient, and anything you can say about that, time permitting.
And then Iris, just tell me when I need to be quiet and kick me off. Okay. Thank you so much for
Please
that.
don't. We want to hear you forever.
Y'all are never gonna leave. Get ready. You're gonna move in with me pretty much. Come on, come to Nashville. Um, uh, it's thank you very much for that question because that first paper. Okay, so I didn't present and I was back and forth about whether, when you're always like, I don't want to throw people off with too much stuff. So thank you for the opportunity to share this. In that first paper on Journal of Marriage and Family, one of the other questions that we were very much interested in was, is this duplication question, right? So one of the things we know about housework time is that everyone's terrible at estimating their housework time. We're bad at it. We think we do more. We think we do more than we actually do. So if they ask people, for example, in a survey, like how many hours a week do you spend, we all overestimate. Men tend to overestimate more than women, but everyone is a little bit of a liar. Because then when they go and actually have people fill out, time use surveys where they get a more precise measure, or they ping them that they find that people are inflating their time. So one of our questions was like this question of duplication, right? So is like, it can't be that are you duplicating your time too, right? Like, are we duplicating the mental load? Are we good at estimating our mental load? And so Anna had two measures. She also had the like share measure, like how much of the share of the mental load do you do? And then the concrete questions that I showed you, the 21. So she first asks like, how much of the family's mental load do you do? Then she asks the 21 measures. It's like, this is perfect to do that same test about whether people are liars. And I mean liars in the most unkind way, unkind way. No, I'm just joking about that. I mean that I don't mean liars, but do we overestimate? Do we inflate? And the answer was yes, right? That actually people are inflating according to how and men more than mothers more than fathers, right? It's a little bit consistent, but this is where I think the mental load is so tricky because if I asked you, like, okay, like it's hard, how do you estimate it, right? You could, but they also could not be liars. Like they could be misestimating and inflating, but it's also possible that I'm carrying the same mental load that my partner's carrying. And we're doing it twice, right? Because we both really care about our child's education, or we both really care about whether the Thanksgiving meal is good. And this is where the mental load, again, in terms of measurement, because this is one of the things I'm trying to get at, is like it's tricky, right? Because how do I get an estimate when the mental load could happen in a second? Like if I said to you, how much time did you spend doing the dishes? You could probably do a start and stop. But if I asked you, like, how much time did you spend today thinking about your aging parent? How much time today did you think about, your kid? How much time today did you think about your baby, your children's education? I mean, it's like 1 to 1 million cajillion times a day, right? Like, so this is where once you try to get into this survey measure of the mental load, you can see it gets real tricky. And I don't think that it's impossible to say that people are telling the truth, but also duplicating because we could all right now be thinking about the same thing. So in conclusion, in the this is one piece of that Journal of Marriage and Family paper is a discussion of that. And then at the end, I wrote like a really good conclusion where I was trying to really say this. And in addition to that, that's one of the things that I'm asking people to do in my audit in the book that will come out is really get clear on when you are duplicating and when that's necessary and when that actually is essential for the family functioning or it's just wasted energy. Because one of the other things I'm finding is that it's so tightly tied, the mental load is tied to burnout, that it doesn't make sense for us to be carrying 8 million things when really only three of them are that critical at this moment in time. Because your mental load energy
Thank you.
isn't finite, isn't infinite.
Thank you so much, Leah.
You're welcome.
We have another question from Megan McKenzie. Megan, are you here? Otherwise, I'll read it. Um, yep, so I'll read it. So Megan is interested in outsourcing. So again, also working on the higher income dads who step up, she says in quotation marks here. Um, what do we know about whether they do it themselves or whether they outsource the work?
That's interesting. Um, whether I mean, I'm doing a lot of work on the outsourcing too. I'll do a comment and then I'll hopefully be able to think through that high income dad part specifically. So one piece of this research project that I've done is I've really been interested in you're always camera ready, don't you dare. This is, please. Um, uh, One of the things I've been trying to get at is like, how do you reduce the mental load in part through outsourcing? And so I've been working and I'm working in part with a project with Allison Tamager and New America Foundation too about how do we get clear on what types of outsourcing works. One of the reasons was one chapter of the book and one part of the research is I was trying to figure out what can you do to lighten the mental load, right? We know outsourcing, we know from the housework research and the childcare research that more income reduces it, right? That you have more money to outsource, that you can do more, that when mothers earn more money, they tend to activate that money to outsource or support the family, right? That it really matters if the mothers earn more. And so I was interested in this, whether the same principles will work for the mental load. So what I did was I gave people money. I gave them cash. I gave them $100 a week for 4 weeks. I did a little pilot because I wanted to see where the moms would spend the money, where they would put that cash, and what they would do. And the reason I did that was because first I was going to randomly assign them to, a robot vacuum or a meal delivery service or an app. And then one of my friends said, you're kind of assuming you're making some assumptions and you're also allocating work to people that might not want that work. And so I thought I would try to take a little bit of a page out of the philanthropic book and just give people, assume people are empowered to know how to spend their money to make their lives better. And so I gave them money and then I asked them what they did with that money and I asked them how it lightened their mental load and looked. And the short answer was it lightened the mental load sometimes. It worked in that it made people feel one of the barriers for mothers is feeling like they deserve to take and that they can take the money and it shouldn't go to the family that they can take from the communal pot. That was one of the first barriers I had to get past was like, you deserve to take, and it doesn't make you a bad mother, and that money should go to you. Um, and so that's one kind of barrier. And for many of them, some of them it did lighten, but they had undulations, right? The mental load went up and down. But what they talked about was feeling for the first time like their mental load energy was valuable, like that they had to take it seriously. They couldn't ignore themselves forever. In terms of the high, okay, so that's a whole chapter of the book, and I love that chapter because they did things like one mother bought a loaf of bread from a fancy bakery and then ate the whole loaf of bread on the drive home just so her children couldn't have any of it. Like how beautiful is that, right? Like she's just like the whole thing. Like I don't want them to have a piece of it. I loved it. Um, anyway, so it's like $4.50 well spent, right? Just to feel empowered to drive home while eating a loaf of bread. But in terms of the high income dads, like I just don't know how they would outsource some of this, right? Like, sure, the care. I mean, I guess I'm curious your thought on this because like how do you outsource the scheduling of your kids' stuff? I think they just are more engaged dads, but I'm curious what you think. Like, would you be handing it over to someone at work? Would you be not doing it? Like, I don't know if you've thought that deeply about it, but I'm just kind of curious where your brain's going on this. Because I think that outsourcing, what I keep seeing is for the mental load is pretty hard. And you have to be really clear on what the mental load is, what piece you're going to out, like what piece is draining you, and then the solution. It's almost like has to be very tightly coupled. Um, so that's
Oh,
my
I know
word with
Megan.
this.
Megan is with us, but yes, respect her. Oh, here Megan. But what
Hey,
are you saying?
hey. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Your presentation's been fantastic, and I just also love the tone and the spirit of it. I'm just so enthusiastic. I just got back from the gym, so excuse I didn't intend to turn the camera off, but I guess I was just wondering about the 101 ranking, and just how many of them are we both do it, or we outsource it, or someone else does it. And I guess I'm interested in that. Who is that other person? And is it someone that they've hired, or is it someone in the house, and how that accounts for the distribution, I guess. I guess that's the point where I was sort of curious and just thinking, of course, not everything on that list is outsourceable, but for those families that outsource the max amount of things that are outsourceable, how that might impact. Like I would just assume that the high income men and the high income women would make those choices. But as your research shows, maybe that's not always the case. But anyway, thank you so much for all the information so far.
You're welcome. I'm gonna give you the short answer is I have to go back and look. It must be in the appendix. My bet is that from memory is that it wasn't high. Like outsourcing on this is low. Like one is a data question and I don't have the answer explicitly with me now, but I think we probably have the distribution of the descriptives in the appendix. Um, so could be answered. Um, it's like I want to tell you another something, but in terms of the outsourcing, like in terms of the outsourcing, people were it could be someone like a if you had a grandparent or someone a nanny, a babysitter, a grandparent. What from our interviews we did explicitly ask like how do you outsource your mental load, what works or what works to reduce it, and some of it was other people, family, and community. Some of it was self-care, some of it was so there's a range of solutions that people employed, but I know you're asking me a slightly different question, and the real answer to your specific question is I don't know, and we probably have it in the appendix, and I can go back and find it and send it through to you. Um,
Leah,
yeah.
we have one more minute, and I have one burning question from Erin, which I don't know how burning it is for her, but I find it super interesting. So I'm going to quickly ask it, and that is, you talk about invisible, unbounded, enduring, right? As describing the work. What if we made it visible? What is that helping, bounding? What could we have, an Excel spreadsheet? Do we know anything about that? In fact, one of our former students did that. I think it's called Fair Share, is her NGO that she started. So as a
That's
side.
cool. Yes, like, okay, so thank you, Erin, very much for your question and nice to see you as per always. Yes, that's one of my key purposes, I think, in this world is to help make the invisible visible around the mental load. And then in addition to that, thinking about not only making it visible, but giving people the language. This is in part why I have the 8 types, the 7 different stages, because I think what's going on is you can't what I see when I share this research with people who are interested, I go to organizations and talk about it, or if I talk about it with the research participants, it's like an aha moment, like, oh, that's it. Like I never knew I was carrying so many pieces. Like yeah, that one and that one. And then, yeah, right. And yeah, and then you go through the stage and it's like, yeah, oh, and that and that and that. So we can't even have the conversation if we don't have the language. So the first stage, I think, is to give us the language to make the invisible visible. And this is what I hope the book will do. So thank you very much for your lovely question. Is Erin, and I love seeing you and thanks for
Oh,
coming.
here is Erin. I'm so sorry. Erin, why don't you, sir? So sorry. I read your question. Good. Lovely to see you. I think you're not unmuted. So, okay. And we have to wrap up. But thank you all so much for coming. This was the last seminar of the semester and a highlight for all of us. I should also take a moment to brag about Anna because Anna Catalano Weeks was a student here, as you said. So I have warm memories of her. And so I'm very happy that this work is continuing. She also was a fellow at the Women in Public Policy program, as some of our friends here on the screen, Ashley and Megan, who are still here. In any case, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming and have a wonderful break. We'll be back here at the beginning of the spring semester, early February. We'll send out invites, of course. The focus of the spring seminar is going to be on fairness and meritocracy at work. And we hope we see many of you back. And with that, Leah, thank you so much for sharing your insights, for all the work that you do, and for the many people who were able to join us today. Have a great
Bye,
rest of the evening.
everyone. Thank you for the opportunity.